Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
I found the house on Gutter Lane during the worst winter of my life. I had lost my job in November, my girlfriend in December, and by January I was looking at rental listings I could barely afford, clicking through photos of rooms I would never feel warm in again. The blue house at the end of the dead-end street was cheap. Too cheap. But the photo showed a porch that looked friendly, and the realtor's description mentioned hardwood floors and a fenced backyard, and I was too tired to ask why the price had dropped 4 times in 2 years. The drive to Gutter Lane felt longer than it should have. The main road gave way to a cracked two-lane, which gave way to gravel, which gave way to pavement that had been patched so many times it looked like a scar. The other 5 houses on the lane were dark, their driveways empty, their windows blank as closed eyes. I parked in front of number 6 and sat in my car for a long time, just looking at it. The blue paint was peeling around the windows, and the porch sagged on one side, but that wasn't what made me hesitate. It was the quiet. No wind. No birds. No sound at all except my own breathing, which seemed too loud, almost rude. The realtor, a woman named Margaret, was already waiting on the porch. She had kind eyes and a nervous habit of touching her collar, and she smiled at me in a way that felt practiced and sad. She handed me the key without much small talk, and she opened the door, and we walked inside. The house was cold, but not damp. The floors were bare and clean, and the walls were a faded cream color that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. We walked through the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom with its green tiles, and then the 2 small bedrooms at the back. Everything was ordinary. Everything was empty. And then I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the wall of the second bedroom. I turned to Margaret. She had stopped touching her collar. She was staring at the wall, her face pale, and she said, very quietly, "You heard that." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She sighed, and she sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and she told me the truth. The house had been built in 1972 by a man named Harold Finch. He had lived there with his wife and 2 daughters until 1983, when he walked into the woods behind the house and never came back. The family stayed for another year. Then the knocking started. Then the whispers. The wife moved out, took the girls, never spoke of the house again. But the younger daughter came back 20 years later. She stood in the front yard for an hour, walked into the same woods, and was never seen again. Margaret looked at me. "People have rented this house since then," she said. "Some stayed for months. Some stayed for years. But none of them ever moved back after they left. And the ones who didn't leave?" She shook her head. "They didn't leave. I should have walked away. I was 23, broke, and desperate, but I should have walked away. I didn't. I signed the lease. I moved in 3 days later. The first week was quiet. The house settled at night with the usual creaks and groans, and I told myself that the knocking I had heard was just an old pipe, just the wind, just my imagination. I started to feel almost comfortable. I painted the living room a warmer color. I bought a second-hand couch and a table. I began to think that Gutter Lane might be a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild the life I had lost. Then the knocking came back. It was a Tuesday night, and I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, from the wall behind the mirror. I froze, toothbrush in my mouth, staring at my own reflection. The knocking came again. Then it moved, traveling along the wall toward the living room, 3 knocks at a time, like footsteps. I followed it. I pressed my ear to the living room wall, and I heard breathing. Slow, deep, wet, like someone breathing through a mouthful of water. Then a voice. Low and rasping, as if it hadn't spoken in years. It said, "You're in my house." I ran outside and slept in my car. The next morning, I called Margaret and told her I was leaving. She didn't argue. She sent someone to collect the key, and I drove away from Gutter Lane without looking back. I told myself it was over. I told myself I had escaped. That was 7 years ago. I have moved 5 times since then. 5 different cities. 5 different apartments. And in every single one, the knocking has followed me. It starts softly at first, a few knocks in the night that I can almost ignore. Then it grows louder, more insistent, moving through the walls, always staying just ahead of me. The breathing comes next, slow and wet, from inside the floor, the ceiling, the closet. And then the voice. "You're in my house." Last night, I woke up to knocking from inside my closet. 3 knocks, then 3 more, then 3 more. I pressed my ear to the closet door. The breathing was louder than I had ever heard it. And then I heard something new. Laughter. Low and quiet and patient, the laughter of something that has been waiting for a very long time and knows that its wait is almost over. I didn't open the door. I pushed my dresser against it and lay awake until dawn. When the sun rose, I opened the closet and found nothing. Just my clothes, my shoes, the ordinary things of an ordinary life. But the air inside was cold, much colder than the rest of the room, and it smelled like dried flowers. Sweet and soft and wrong. I am writing this in a coffee shop, because I cannot be alone in my apartment right now. But I know the knocking will be there when I get back. It is always there. The house on Gutter Lane is not a place anymore. It is a thing that lives in walls, that follows people, that waits for them to stop running. Harold Finch stopped running. His daughter stopped running. And one night, I will stop too. I will open the closet door. I will press my ear to the plaster. And I will finally see what has been breathing on the other side. If you ever see a listing for a blue house at the end of a dead-end street, do not take the key. Do not step inside. Because once you hear the knocking, you will never stop hearing it. And once the voice says your name, you will never be sure, ever again, that any house is truly your own. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of a sleepy Sunday morning, but something deeper, something that felt like a held breath. I had grown up in the town of St. Adrian my whole life, and I knew the sound of those bells the way I knew my mother's voice. Every Sunday at 8 in the morning, rain or shine, winter or summer, the bells of St. Adrian's Church rang out across the valley. They called the faithful to prayer, marked the hours, and reminded everyone within earshot that God was still there, still listening, still watching. But on that Sunday in late October, the bells did not ring. I woke up at 8:15, which was late for me, and I lay in bed for a moment, waiting. The morning light was gray and thin, pressing against my curtains like a hand against glass. I listened for the bells. I heard nothing. Not the wind. Not the birds. Not even the distant hum of a car on the main road. The town was quiet in a way that felt wrong, the way a house feels wrong when you know someone is standing in the next room but you cannot hear them breathing. I got dressed slowly, telling myself that the bells had probably broken, that someone would fix them by next week, that there was nothing to worry about. But I did not believe myself. I walked to the church that morning because my car wouldn't start. That should have been my second warning. The engine turned over once, coughed, and died, and when I tried again, there was only a clicking sound, like a tongue against teeth. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out into the cold October air. The streets were empty. Not quiet, but empty. The houses I passed had their curtains drawn, their porches bare, their driveways full of cars that looked like they hadn't moved in days. I saw no one. Not a single person. And the further I walked, the more I felt like I was moving through a photograph, a frozen moment that had somehow forgotten to include the people. St. Adrian's Church stood at the center of town, a gray stone building with a steeple that pointed toward heaven like a finger of accusation. The doors were closed, which was unusual for a Sunday morning. I pulled on the heavy iron handle, and the door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty nave. The church was dark. The candles that usually burned near the altar were cold, their wicks black and still. The pews were empty, but they did not look empty in the way of a church between services. They looked abandoned, as if the people who usually sat in them had left in a hurry and had never come back. I walked to the front of the church and stood beneath the bell tower. Above me, through the wooden ceiling, I could see the ropes hanging down from the bells, still and straight as dead things. I pulled one of the ropes. It moved easily, too easily, and there was no sound from above. No clang, no rumble, no echo. Just the soft rustle of the rope sliding through the iron ring, and then silence again. The bells were there. I could see them when I climbed the narrow stairs to the tower. They were intact, their bronze surfaces clean and polished, their clappers hanging loose. But when I struck one with my palm, it made no sound. The metal vibrated under my hand, I could feel it humming, but the air around it stayed perfectly, impossibly silent. I stood in the bell tower for a long time, my hand resting on the cold bronze, trying to understand what I was feeling. Then I heard footsteps below. Slow, heavy footsteps, coming from the nave. I climbed down the stairs and found Father Michael standing in the center aisle, his back to me, his head bowed. He was an old man, nearly 80, with white hair and hands that shook when he held the chalice. But he was not shaking now. He was perfectly still, and when he turned to face me, his eyes were the wrong color. They had always been brown, a warm, tired brown, the color of coffee with too much cream. Now they were gray. Flat and gray, like the sky outside, like the morning light pressing against the windows. He said, "You shouldn't be here." His voice was the same, but it wasn't. There was something underneath it, a second voice, lower and slower, speaking the same words a heartbeat after he did. I asked him what had happened to the bells. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked up at the tower, and he said, "They stopped because we stopped listening. And now something else is listening instead." He turned and walked toward the altar, and I followed him. The candles on the altar were not cold anymore. They were burning. All of them, dozens of candles, their flames tall and still, giving off no heat and no smoke. The wax did not melt. The wicks did not shorten. They just burned, silently, in the dark church, casting shadows that moved even though nothing else did. Father Michael knelt before the altar and began to pray. But the words that came out of his mouth were not Latin. They were not English. They were sounds I had never heard before, sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere that had never been meant for speaking. The candles flickered. The shadows on the walls grew longer, darker, and I saw shapes in them that had no names. I backed away from the altar, toward the doors, but the doors were closed now, and when I pulled on the handle, it did not move. I looked back at Father Michael. He had stopped praying. He was looking at me with those flat gray eyes, and he was smiling. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who has seen something terrible and has decided, finally, to stop being afraid. He said, "The bells didn't break. They were answered." Something called back from the other side, and the bells heard it, and they chose to be silent rather than ring for that. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't need the bells anymore. It has us now. He stood up, and the candles went out all at once, as if someone had blown on them from every direction at the same time. The church was dark, utterly dark, and I could not see my own hand in front of my face. I heard Father Michael walking toward me, his footsteps slow and heavy on the stone floor. I heard him stop just in front of me. I felt his breath on my cheek, cold and dry, like air from a tomb. And then he whispered, in that voice that was his and not his, "Don't go home. It's already there." I ran. I don't remember opening the doors, but I must have, because suddenly I was outside, standing in the gray morning light, gasping for air. The streets were still empty. The houses were still dark. But now I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On every door, every window, every surface of every house, there were scratches. Long, thin scratches, like fingernails dragged through paint, like claws dragged through wood. The scratches formed patterns, loops and spirals and shapes that almost looked like letters from a language I had never learned. I walked past them, faster and faster, until I was running again, running toward my house at the end of the street, running toward the door I had left unlocked. My house looked the same as I had left it. The curtains were drawn. The porch was bare. The car sat in the driveway, its hood cold, its windows dark. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The kitchen was the way I had left it, the coffee cup still on the counter, the keys still lying next to the sink. But the air was different. It was cold, much colder than the October morning outside, and it smelled like incense and something else, something metallic, like blood that had dried a long time ago. I walked through the living room, the hallway, the bedroom. Everything was in its place. Everything was ordinary. And then I heard the bells. They were ringing from inside my walls. Not the bells of St. Adrian's. These bells were smaller, higher pitched, like the bells on a child's toy or a wind chime. They rang in no rhythm I could follow, a chaotic, tinkling sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. I pressed my ear to the wall of the living room. The bells grew louder. I pressed my ear to the floor. The bells grew louder still. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, and the bells stopped. In their place, I heard breathing. Slow and deep and wet. The same breathing I had heard in the church, in the darkness, when Father Michael had stood in front of me and whispered. The breathing was coming from above me, from the attic, from the space I had never once entered in the 3 years I had lived in that house. I did not go to the attic. I left the house and walked back to the church. The doors were open now, and the nave was full of people. The entire town was there, sitting in the pews, their faces turned toward the altar. Their eyes were gray, all of them, flat and gray like the sky, like the morning light, like the surface of a lake that has frozen solid and will never thaw. They were not praying. They were listening. The church was silent except for the sound of their breathing, slow and deep and perfectly synchronized, as if they were all sharing a single set of lungs. I walked down the center aisle, and no one looked at me. I stood at the altar, and no one turned. I looked up at the bell tower, and I saw that the ropes were moving. Not being pulled, but moving on their own, swaying back and forth like pendulums, even though there was no wind and no one was touching them. Father Michael was standing behind the altar, his hands raised, his mouth open. The words coming out of him were the same sounds I had heard before, the ones that were not Latin or English or any language I recognized. The candles were burning again, tall and still, casting shadows that moved like living things. And the shadows were reaching for the people in the pews. Thin, dark fingers, stretching out from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, touching the gray-eyed faces, stroking their cheeks, their foreheads, their closed mouths. The people did not flinch. They sat perfectly still, breathing in and out, in perfect unison, and I realized that they were not listening to the shadows. They were listening to something beyond the shadows, something that was speaking through the shadows, something that had answered the silence of the bells and was still answering. I ran again. I ran out of the church, down the empty streets, past the scratched doors and the dark windows and the cars that would not start. I ran until I reached the edge of town, the place where the pavement turned to gravel and the gravel turned to dirt and the dirt led to the highway. I stood on the highway for a long time, waiting for a car, waiting for anyone. No cars came. No one came. The highway was empty in both directions, as far as I could see, and the sky above it was the same flat gray that had been pressing down on the town since morning. I walked for hours. I walked until my feet bled and my throat was dry and the sun began to set behind the trees. And when the sun set, I saw the lights. Every house in town was lit up. Every window glowed with a warm, yellow light, the kind of light that usually meant someone was home, someone was cooking dinner, someone was reading a book or watching television or talking on the phone. But I knew now that no one was home. Not the people I had grown up with. Not my neighbors, my friends, the man who delivered my mail or the woman who cut my hair. They were all in the church, sitting in the pews, breathing in and out, their eyes gray, their mouths closed, their hands folded in their laps like children waiting for a story they had already heard 1,000 times. I did not go back. I kept walking, down the highway, into the dark. I walked all night, and when the sun rose again, I was in a different town, a town with cars and people and bells that rang on Sunday morning. I found a motel and slept for a day and a half. When I woke up, I called my mother. The phone rang and rang. No one answered. I called my father. The same. I called my brother, my aunt, my best friend from high school. No one answered. No one has answered any of my calls in the 3 weeks since that Sunday. I have driven back to the edge of town twice. The first time, the road was gone. Not blocked, not closed, but gone, replaced by a field of dry grass that looked like it had been there for 100 years. The second time, the field was still there, but I saw something in the distance. A steeple. The steeple of St. Adrian's Church, rising above the grass, gray stone against a gray sky. And from the steeple, I heard bells. Not ringing. Not chiming. Just a low, steady hum, like the sound of a tuning fork held against a grave. I did not walk toward it. I got back in my car, and I drove away, and I have not gone back since. But the bells followed me. I hear them at night, in the walls of my motel room, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the silence between songs on the radio. They are the same bells, the small ones, the tinkling ones, ringing in no rhythm I can follow. And sometimes, when they stop, I hear the breathing. Slow and deep and wet. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear the voice. It is not Father Michael's voice. It is not any voice I recognize. It is the voice of the thing that answered when the bells fell silent, the thing that is still answering, the thing that is still listening. It says my name. It says it over and over, in a language I do not speak but somehow understand. It says, the bells stopped for you. They stopped because you stopped believing. And now something else believes in you. I do not know what that means. I do not want to know. But every morning, when I wake up, I check my eyes in the mirror. They are still brown. Still warm. Still mine. And every morning, I thank whatever God is left that I did not stay in that church, that I did not sit in those pews, that I did not let the shadows touch my face. But I am running out of motels. I am running out of roads. And I am starting to think that the town of St. Adrian was not a place. It was a door. And the door was opened the moment the bells fell silent. And now the door will not close. If you live in a town with a church, and the bells do not ring on a Sunday morning, do not investigate. Do not go to the church. Do not look for the people. Do not press your ear to the walls. Just leave. Drive until you cannot see the steeple, and then drive further. Because the silence is not empty. Something fills it the moment the bells stop. And once it fills the silence, it will start filling everything else. Your house. Your head. Your heart. And one day, you will wake up with gray eyes, and you will walk to the church, and you will sit in a pew, and you will breathe in and out, in perfect unison with everyone else who ever stopped listening to the bells. That is what happened to my town. That is what is happening to me. And that is what will happen to you, if you are not careful, if you do not listen, if you let the silence go on just a little too long. The bells are not just metal and rope. They are a border. And when the border falls, something crosses over. Something that was always waiting. Something that knows your name. I was born in a village that no longer has a name. If you look at a map of the region, the place where my childhood home once stood is now marked as a reservoir, a blue circle surrounded by green, as if nothing of importance ever happened there. But the reservoir is a lie. They flooded the valley to hide what was underneath. They covered the well with concrete and stone, and they told the world that the village had been relocated for a dam project. The people who lived there went along with the story because they had no choice. You cannot tell the truth about a well that remembers names. You cannot explain why half the village walked into the water on the same night and never came back. So you lie. You move. You start over. And you hope that 50 years is long enough to forget. My grandmother told me about the well when I was 9 years old. We were sitting on the porch of her small house, the one she had built after the relocation, and the sun was setting behind the hills. She was old by then, her hands knotted with arthritis, her eyes clouded with cataracts, but her voice was clear and steady. She said, "There is a well at the bottom of the lake. It was there before the village was built, and it will be there after the village is gone. Every 50 years, the water in the well turns black. Not dark. Black. Like ink, like oil, like a hole in the world. And on that night, anyone who drinks from the well forgets how to leave." I asked her what that meant. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "You know how when you go to sleep at night, you dream, and in the dream you are somewhere else, doing something else, and you forget that you have a body in a bed? It is like that, but worse. The people who drink from the well forget that they have a home. They forget that they have a family. They forget that there is a world beyond the village. They walk in circles forever, because every path looks the same to them, and every road leads back to the well. Some of them are still walking. They have been walking for 100 years. 200. They do not age. They do not tire. They just walk, and the well watches, and the water stays black until they drink again. I did not believe her, of course. I was 9, and I thought my grandmother was old and confused, mixing up fairy tales with real memories. But she was not confused. She was the only one in our family who remembered the last time the water turned black. She was 12 years old when it happened, in the summer of 1932. She told me that the villagers had known the signs for weeks before. The animals had grown restless, refusing to go near the well. The birds had stopped singing in the trees around the village square. The water from the well had tasted strange, sweet and bitter at the same time, like almonds and ash. The older residents had warned the younger ones. They had told the stories, the same stories that had been passed down for generations. But no one listened. No one ever listens. On the night the water turned black, my grandmother was sent to bed early. She lay in her room, listening to the sounds of the village, the normal sounds of people cooking and talking and laughing. Then the sound stopped. Not slowly, but all at once, as if someone had placed a hand over the mouth of the world. She got up and went to the window. The village square was empty. The doors of the houses were open, and the lights were on, but there was no one inside. She ran to the well. She was 12, and she was fast, and she reached the stone rim just as the last of the villagers were climbing over the edge. She told me that they did not jump. They climbed, slowly and carefully, as if they were descending a ladder into a dark room. Their faces were calm, their eyes were open, and their mouths were moving, whispering something she could not hear. She grabbed her mother's hand as it disappeared over the rim. She pulled, but her mother's hand was cold and heavy, and it slipped through her fingers like water. She leaned over the edge and looked down. The well was black, utterly black, and the blackness was moving, swirling, rising. She saw faces in the darkness. Not the faces of the villagers who had just climbed down, but older faces, faces she did not recognize, faces that had been waiting in the well for a very long time. They were smiling. And then the black water rose and covered them, and the well was silent. My grandmother was the only one left. She ran from the village that night and never went back. She told the authorities that a flood had washed everyone away, and the authorities believed her because the spring rains had been heavy and the river was high. They searched for bodies and found none. They declared the village a total loss and relocated the survivors. There were no other survivors. My grandmother was the only one. She was 12 years old, and she had seen her entire family climb into a well and disappear, and she had spent the rest of her life trying to forget what she had seen. But she never forgot. And when she told me the story, sitting on the porch with the sun setting behind the hills, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Fear. Not the abstract fear of a story, but the specific, cold fear of someone who knows that the story is not over. She gripped my hand, her knotted fingers digging into my skin, and she said, "The well does not forget. It remembers every name that was ever whispered over its rim. It remembers your name. It has always remembered your name. And when the water turns black again, it will call for you. It will call for all of you. And you will want to go. That is the worst part. You will want to go." I grew up, as children do, and I put my grandmother's story in a box in the back of my mind. I went to school, got a job, moved to the city. I told myself that the past was the past, that the well was buried under concrete and stone, that the reservoir had drowned any memory of the village. I did not think about the 50 years. I did not count the years. I did not realize that 1932 plus 50 is 1982, and that 1982 plus 50 is 2032, and that 2032 was not some distant future but a date that was approaching faster than I wanted to admit. I was 39 years old when I got the letter. The letter had no return address. The envelope was yellowed and thin, as if it had been sitting in a drawer for decades. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in a shaky script I did not recognize. It said, "The water is turning black again. The well remembers you. Come home." I threw the letter away. I told myself it was a prank, a hoax, someone from the village playing a cruel joke. But I could not stop thinking about it. I could not stop dreaming about the well. In my dreams, I was standing at its rim, looking down into the darkness, and the darkness was looking back. The faces were there, the old faces, the ones my grandmother had described. They were smiling. And they were whispering my name. I tried to ignore the dreams. I tried to stay busy, to work late, to drink enough that I would sleep without remembering. But the dreams only grew more vivid. I started to see the well when I was awake, in the corner of my eye, in the reflection of a window, in the dark water of a coffee cup. I started to hear the whispering, not in my ears but in my mind, a soft, persistent murmur that sounded like my mother's voice and my father's voice and the voices of everyone I had ever lost. They were not asking me to come back. They were telling me. And the telling felt like the most natural thing in the world, like hunger, or thirst, or the need to sleep. I drove back to the village on a Thursday in late October. The reservoir was still there, blue and calm, surrounded by bare trees and brown grass. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked to the edge of the water. The lake was deeper than I remembered, or maybe it was just darker. The sun was low in the sky, and the shadows were long, and the water reflected nothing. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember where the well had been. My grandmother had described it clearly. It was in the center of the village square, surrounded by stones, with a wooden roof and a rope and a bucket. But the village was gone, drowned under 40 feet of water, and the well was somewhere beneath my feet, buried in mud and darkness. I should have left then. I should have turned around and driven back to the city and never thought about the well again. But the whispering was louder now, and it was not just in my mind. It was coming from the water. Soft, muffled, but unmistakable. Voices. Dozens of voices, speaking in a language that was almost English but not quite, a language that had been spoken in that valley long before the village was built, long before anyone had written anything down. I knelt at the edge of the reservoir and put my hand in the water. It was cold, much colder than it should have been, and it was thick, almost syrupy, like old blood. I pulled my hand back. My fingers were stained black. I drove home that night with my hand on the steering wheel, watching the black stains slowly fade from my skin. By the time I reached the city, they were gone. But I could still feel the cold. It had seeped into my bones, into my blood, into something deeper than flesh. I went to bed and dreamed of the well again. This time, I was not standing at the rim. I was climbing down. The stones were rough and wet under my hands, and the darkness was warm and close, and the voices were all around me, singing a song I had known my whole life but had never heard before. I woke up with my face pressed against the bedroom floor, my fingernails caked with dirt, my mouth full of black water. I spit it out. I coughed and gagged and crawled to the bathroom and turned on the light. The water in the sink was clear. The water in the toilet was clear. The water from the tap was clean and cold and normal. But I knew what I had tasted. I knew what I had swallowed. And I knew that the well was not buried. It was not drowned. It was not gone. It was waiting, patient and hungry, and it had found me. The next day, I called my brother. He lived 3 states away, and we had not spoken in years. He answered on the third ring, and his voice was strange, distant, as if he was speaking from a great distance. I asked him if he had been dreaming about the well. There was a long silence. Then he said, "How did you know?" I told him about my grandmother's story, about the letter, about the black water in my mouth. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "It's not just us. I've been talking to cousins, to aunts, to people I haven't seen since I was a child. Everyone who came from that village is having the same dreams. Everyone is hearing the same voices. The well knows all of us. It knew us before we were born. It knew our parents and their parents and the parents before them. And now it wants us back. We decided to go together. I do not know why. Maybe we thought that if there were 2 of us, we could resist. Maybe we thought that we could find the well, seal it, stop it from calling anyone else. Maybe we were just tired of fighting the dreams, tired of waking up with dirt under our nails and black water on our lips. We drove to the reservoir on a Saturday morning, just after dawn. The sky was clear and cold, and the water was still, and the trees around the shore were bare and black. We rented a small boat from a man who did not ask questions, and we rowed to the center of the lake. The water was deeper here, darker, and the sun seemed to slide off its surface without penetrating. We stopped the boat where my grandmother had said the village square used to be. The water was so dark that we could not see the bottom, could not see anything below us except blackness. My brother leaned over the side and put his hand in the water. When he pulled it back, his fingers were stained black. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide, and he said, "It's here. It's right below us." I leaned over the other side. The whispering was so loud now that I could barely hear my own thoughts. The voices were not angry. They were not sad. They were happy. They were the voices of people who had been waiting for a very long time and were finally being visited. I do not remember jumping. I remember the cold. I remember the darkness. I remember the feeling of hands on my arms, my legs, my face, pulling me down, not roughly but gently, the way a mother pulls a child into an embrace. The water was black, and the blackness was warm, and the voices were singing, and I was not afraid. I was not afraid because I had forgotten how to be afraid. I had forgotten what fear felt like. I had forgotten my name. I had forgotten the city, the car, the boat, my brother. I had forgotten everything except the well. The well was the only thing that was real. The well was the only thing that had ever been real. I do not know how long I was under the water. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. It could have been 50 years. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the shore of the reservoir, my clothes soaked, my skin gray, my mouth full of mud. My brother was next to me, also soaked, also gray, also staring at the sky with empty eyes. We did not speak. We did not need to. We both knew what had happened. We had drunk from the well. We had forgotten how to leave. And now we were walking. That was 3 months ago. I have been walking ever since. I walk during the day, and I walk at night, and I walk when the sun rises and when it sets. I walk because I cannot remember how to stop. I walk because every time I try to sit down, every time I try to lie down, every time I try to rest, I hear the whispering, and the whispering tells me to keep going. I do not know where I am going. I do not remember where I live. I do not remember my name. I remember only the well. The well that remembers your name. The well that called me back. The well that I will never leave. Sometimes, I see other walkers. They are on the roads, in the fields, on the edges of highways. They move slowly, their heads down, their feet shuffling, their eyes fixed on the ground. They do not speak. They do not look at each other. They just walk. And when I see them, I know that they drank from the well too. I know that they forgot how to leave. I know that they will walk until their bodies give out, and then they will keep walking, because the well does not care about bodies. The well cares about names. And it has all of our names. My grandmother was right. The well does not forget. It remembers every person who ever lived in that village, every person who ever drank from its water, every person who ever whispered a prayer over its rim. It remembers you, too, if your family came from that valley. It remembers your name. It has always remembered your name. And when the water turns black again, it will call for you. It will whisper to you in your dreams. It will pull you back to the reservoir, to the boat, to the dark water. And you will go. You will go because you will want to go. That is the worst part. You will want to go. I am writing this in a bus station, on a piece of cardboard I found in a trash can. I do not know where the bus station is. I do not know how I got here. I do not know my name. But I know the well. I know that it is still there, at the bottom of the reservoir, buried under concrete and stone, waiting for the next 50 years to pass. And I know that when the water turns black again, someone will drink. Someone always drinks. And then they will walk. They will walk and walk and walk, and they will forget everything except the well, and the well will remember them forever. If you have ever heard a story about a well that remembers names, do not dismiss it. Do not tell yourself it is just a fairy tale. Do not wait for the water to turn black. Leave. Take your family and leave. Change your name. Move to a different country. Forget the valley, forget the village, forget the reservoir. Because the well is patient. The well is hungry. And the well knows your name. It has always known your name. And it will call for you. It will call for you in the quiet moments, in the dark hours, in the space between sleeping and waking. And one day, you will answer. One day, you will walk to the water. One day, you will drink. And then you will walk forever. Just like me. Just like my grandmother's family. Just like everyone who ever heard the whisper and thought they could resist. You cannot resist. The well does not forget. And neither will you. Not until you drink. And then you will forget everything else. Everything except the well. The well that remembers your name. The well that will always remember your name. My mother never talked about the school. Not once, not ever. If I asked her about her childhood, she would change the subject or find a chore to do or simply go silent in a way that filled the room with something heavier than anger. I learned not to ask. But I learned other things instead. I learned that she would not drive down Old Mill Road after sunset. I learned that she kept the windows of our house covered with thick curtains, even on the hottest days of summer. I learned that she checked the locks on the doors 3 times every night, and that she always left a light on in the hallway. These were not quirks. These were defenses. And when I was old enough to understand, I started asking different questions. Not about her childhood. About the school. The school was called Millbrook Elementary. It stood at the end of Old Mill Road, a low building of red brick with white trim around the windows and a flagpole in the front yard that had flown the American flag every morning for 53 years. That was what the records said, anyway. I found those records in the county archives when I was 22, working as a summer intern in a dusty room full of files that no one had opened in decades. The records were thin, incomplete, and they ended abruptly in September of 1973. The last entry was a purchase order for chalk. After that, nothing. No attendance records, no maintenance logs, no letters from parents or teachers or the school board. It was as if Millbrook Elementary had simply stopped existing in the middle of a school year. And according to the people who lived in that county, that was exactly what had happened. I started interviewing the old residents. There were not many left, even then. Most of the families who had lived near Old Mill Road had moved away in the years after 1973, and the ones who stayed were old, their memories softened by time or hardened by the things they refused to say. But I found a few who were willing to talk. They spoke in low voices, often looking over their shoulders, and they all told the same story. On the morning of September 17, 1973, the school was there. Children were dropped off by their parents, teachers unlocked their classroom doors, and the flag was raised at exactly 8 o'clock. On the morning of September 18th, the school was gone. Not burned. Not collapsed. Not demolished. Gone. The building, the playground, the flagpole, the parking lot, everything. In its place was a field of bare dirt, smooth and flat, as if someone had pressed a giant hand down on the earth and wiped the school away like a smudge on a piece of paper. The children were gone too. 23 children, between the ages of 5 and 11, along with 3 teachers and the principal. Their parents woke up on the morning of September 18th to an empty field where their children's school should have been. There was no rubble. No smoke. No sound. Just dirt, and silence, and a single piece of chalk lying on the ground where the front door used to be. The police searched for weeks. They dug up the field, brought in ground-penetrating radar, interviewed every resident within a 20-mile radius. They found nothing. No bodies, no traces of the building, no explanation. The case went cold, and the town moved on as best it could. But the parents never moved on. Some of them stayed in their houses for years, waiting by the window, hoping that their children would come walking up the road. Some of them went mad. Some of them killed themselves. And some of them, like my mother, simply stopped talking. I did not know, until I started my research, that my mother had been a student at Millbrook Elementary. She was 9 years old in September of 1973, and she should have been in the building on the morning it vanished. But she was not. She was homesick that day, with a fever and a cough that had kept her in bed for 3 days. Her mother, my grandmother, had called the school to report her absence. That phone call was the last recorded communication from Millbrook Elementary. The secretary who answered the phone was never seen again. My mother lay in her bed, drifting in and out of sleep, and she heard nothing. No sirens, no screams, no sounds of a building collapsing or being torn from the earth. Just the normal silence of a weekday morning when everyone else is at school or work. When her mother came to check on her at noon, she looked out the window and saw the field where the school had been. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply closed the curtains, went to the kitchen, and called the police. My mother did not understand what had happened until years later. And by then, she had learned to keep her questions to herself. I wanted to see the field. It took me 3 years to find someone who would take me there. Most of the old residents refused. Some of them became agitated when I asked, their eyes going wide, their hands shaking. One woman, a former teacher who had retired in 1972, told me that the field was cursed, that anyone who stepped on it after dark would hear the children playing. She said they sounded like normal children, laughing and shouting and running, but their voices came from underground, from beneath the dirt, and if you listened too long, you would start to hear them calling your name. She said that her own husband had gone to the field one night in 1975, to prove that there was nothing there. He walked to the center of the dirt, stood still for a moment, and then walked back to his car. He did not speak on the drive home. He did not speak the next day, or the day after that. He never spoke again. He just sat in his chair by the window, staring at the road, until he died in 1982. The doctors said it was a stroke. The woman said it was the children. I finally found a guide. His name was Elias, and he was 87 years old when I met him. He had been the janitor at Millbrook Elementary for 12 years before it vanished. He had been there on September 17th, and he had left early that day because his wife was ill. He was the last person to see the school intact. He agreed to take me to the field on one condition. I had to promise not to speak after sunset. Not a word. Not a whisper. Not even a cough. He said the children could hear everything, and if they heard a living voice above the dirt, they would mistake it for one of their own. And once they mistook you for one of their own, they would not let you leave. We drove to Old Mill Road in his old truck, the windows rolled up tight, the heater blowing warm air against the October chill. The road was unpaved now, little more than 2 ruts in the grass, and the trees on either side had grown thick and wild. Elias drove slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. He did not speak. I did not speak. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under the tires and the soft hum of the engine. After 20 minutes, the trees opened up, and we were there. The field was larger than I had imagined. It stretched for what looked like an acre, flat and bare, covered in dirt that was the color of ash. No grass grew on that field. No weeds, no flowers, no bushes. Just dirt, smooth and level, as if the ground had been rolled and packed and left to wait. The sky above was gray and low, and the air was cold, and the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I stepped out of the truck, and my foot sank into the dirt up to my ankle. The soil was soft, almost powdery, and it made no sound when I walked. No crunch. No rustle. Just a soft, muffled silence that seemed to swallow every noise before it could reach my ears. Elias stayed by the truck. He lit a cigarette and watched me with eyes that had seen too much. I walked to the center of the field, and I stood there, turning slowly, trying to imagine the building that had once stood on this spot. I closed my eyes, and I listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, so faintly that I thought I was imagining it, I heard something. Laughter. High and light, the laughter of children playing. It came from beneath my feet, from the dirt, from somewhere deep in the ground where no light had ever reached. The laughter was not happy. It was hungry. It was the laughter of children who had been waiting for a very long time and had finally heard footsteps above them. I opened my eyes and looked down. The dirt was moving. Not much. Just a slight shifting, a small ripple, as if something below the surface was stirring in its sleep. I stepped back, and the dirt settled. I stepped forward again, and the ripple returned. The laughter grew louder, clearer, and I could hear words now. Not full sentences, but fragments. Come play. Over here. We're hiding. Find us. The voices were young, innocent, the voices of children who did not understand that they were dead. I felt a cold hand wrap around my heart, and I wanted to run. But I could not move. The dirt had risen around my ankles, holding me in place, and the laughter was all around me, inside me, filling my head with images of a playground in a red brick building and a flagpole with a flag that never moved because there was no wind underground. Elias shouted from the truck. I could not understand his words, but his voice broke the spell. The dirt released my ankles, the laughter faded, and I stumbled backward, away from the center of the field. I ran to the truck, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias was already in the driver's seat, the engine running, his face pale and tight. I climbed in, and he drove. He drove fast, the truck bouncing over the ruts, the trees whipping past the windows. He did not stop until we reached the main road, and then he pulled over and turned off the engine. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. He said, "You heard them." It was not a question. I nodded. He said, "They heard you too. They know your name now. They will call for you. They will call every night until you answer." He was right. That was 3 years ago, and I have heard the children every night since. They whisper to me from the walls, from the floor, from the space beneath my bed. They ask me to come play. They tell me they are lonely. They tell me that the school is still there, underground, and that the lights are still on, and the desks are still in rows, and the chalk is still on the board where the teacher left it. They tell me that they have been having class every day for 50 years, and that they are tired, so tired, and they want new playmates. They want me. They want you. They want anyone who will listen. I went back to the field once, alone. I drove to Old Mill Road at midnight, parked my car at the edge of the trees, and walked to the center of the dirt. The children were waiting for me. I could see them this time. Not clearly, but in shapes, in outlines, in movements beneath the surface of the soil. Small hands pressed against the dirt from below, leaving prints that faded as quickly as they appeared. Faces looked up at me, pale and blurred, their mouths open, their eyes dark. They did not speak. They did not need to. I could hear their thoughts, and their thoughts were a single word, repeated over and over. Stay. 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 I did not stay. I ran. But I could feel their hands on my ankles as I ran, soft and cold, reaching up from the ground, trying to pull me down. I reached the car and drove away, and I did not look back. But I know that I will go back. I know that I will keep going back until one night I do not run. One night I will stand in the center of that field, and I will let the dirt rise around my knees, my waist, my chest. I will let the children pull me down into the darkness where the school still stands, where the lights are still on, where the chalk is still on the board. I will sit at a desk, and I will raise my hand, and I will answer the teacher's question. And I will never leave. None of them ever leave. My mother died last spring. She died in her sleep, quietly, with the hallway light still burning. I went through her things after the funeral, and I found a box in the back of her closet. Inside the box were photographs. Old photographs, faded and creased, of a red brick building with white trim. Children stood in front of the building, smiling, their arms around each other. In one photograph, a girl with my mother's eyes looked at the camera. She was 9 years old. She was wearing a blue dress and holding a lunchbox with a cartoon character on the front. She was smiling. But behind her, in the window of the school, there were faces. Not the faces of children. Older faces. Darker faces. Faces that had no business being in a school window. Faces that were watching the girl with my mother's eyes, waiting for her to come back. My mother never went back to the field. She never went near Old Mill Road. She never spoke of the school or the children or the night it vanished. But she kept the photographs. She kept them hidden, in a box in the back of her closet, and she looked at them sometimes, when she thought no one was watching. I know this because I found her fingerprints on them, faint and smudged, as if she had held them often, held them close, held them in the dark hours when the whispering was loudest. She heard the children too. Of course she did. She was one of them, almost. She would have been in that building on September 17th if she had not been sick. She would have vanished with the rest of them. And sometimes, when the whispering was loudest, I think she wished she had. I am 31 years old now. I live alone in a small apartment with thick curtains and multiple locks on the door. I do not sleep well. I do not sleep at all, most nights. I sit in the dark and listen to the children. They are louder now. They are closer. They are not just in the walls anymore. They are in the room with me. I can feel them, small and cold, standing at the foot of my bed. I can see them, pale and blurred, their mouths open, their eyes dark. They reach for me with small hands, and I pull away, but I am tired. I am so tired. And I am starting to think that maybe it would be easier to just let them take me. The school is still there, underground. The children are still inside. They have been waiting for 50 years, and they will wait a little longer. But they are patient. They have nothing but time. And they know my name. They know your name too, if you have read this far. Because the children can hear everything. They can hear the words on this page. They can hear your heartbeat as you read. They can hear the soft sound of your breathing in the quiet of your room. And they are whispering to you now, even if you cannot hear them. They are saying, "Come play. Come play. We're so lonely down here. We want a new playmate. We want you. Do not go to Old Mill Road. Do not stand on the field of dirt. Do not listen to the laughter that comes from beneath your feet. Because once you hear it, you will never stop hearing it. Once they know your name, they will never forget it. And one night, you will find yourself driving down a narrow road, through thick trees, to a field of ash-colored dirt. You will walk to the center, and you will feel the ground shift beneath you. You will hear the children's voices, high and light, calling your name. And you will want to stay. That is the worst part. You will want to stay. The building vanished overnight in 1973. The children are still inside. And they are still waiting. They have been waiting for 50 years. They will wait 50 more. And when you finally come to them, when you finally let the dirt close over your head, they will welcome you. They will show you to your desk. They will give you a piece of chalk. They will teach you the games they play in the dark. And you will never leave. None of them ever leave. Not the children. Not the teachers. Not the janitor who left early and spent the rest of his life listening to the whispers. Not my mother, who kept the photographs hidden and never spoke a word. Not me. And not you. Dust where the school used to be. That is all that is left on the surface. But underneath, the lights are still on. The flag is still raised. The chalk is still on the board. And the children are still playing. They are always playing. And they are always looking for new friends. I have driven through the intersection of Maple and 2nd more times than I can count. It is a small crossroads in a town that has no business having a stop sign at all, let alone one that people whisper about after dark. The sign is old, rusted at the edges, with a white border that has faded to the color of bone. During the day, it is unremarkable. It stands at the corner like any other stop sign, facing the oncoming traffic on Maple Street, telling drivers to pause before crossing into the residential blocks beyond. But at night, things change. And at exactly 3:33 in the morning, the stop sign moves. I did not believe the stories at first. I am not the kind of person who believes in haunted roads or ghostly apparitions or any of the other things that people blame on the dark. I am a practical man, a retired truck driver who spent 40 years on the road, sleeping in rest stops and truck stops and the front seats of my own rig. I have seen strange things, yes. I have seen lights in the sky over the desert and shadows that moved against the wind. But I have never seen anything that I could not explain away with time and thought and a good night's sleep. The stop sign at Maple and 2nd was different. The stop sign at Maple and 2nd broke me. The first time I heard about it was from a neighbor, a young woman named Carla who lived 2 doors down. She had moved to our street after a bad divorce, and she kept to herself mostly, but one evening she knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and a story she needed to tell. She said she had been driving home from her night shift at the hospital, and it was 3:30 in the morning, and she was tired. She took the turn onto Maple Street without thinking, the way she always did, and when she reached the intersection at 2nd, she stopped. The stop sign was facing her. It should have been facing her. That was normal. But as she sat there, waiting for a car that never came, the sign began to turn. Slowly, with a grinding sound like metal on bone, the octagonal face of the sign rotated on its pole. It turned until it was pointing directly at her. And then it pointed past her, down the road behind her, toward her own house. Carla sat there for a full minute, her foot on the brake, her hands frozen on the wheel. The sign did not move again. It just pointed, silent and rusted, toward the place where she lived alone with her 2 cats and her divorce papers and her collection of sleeping pills. She drove home without stopping at any other intersections. She locked the door and checked every window and did not sleep that night. The next evening, she drove past the intersection at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sign was facing the right way, as if nothing had happened. But she knew something had happened. And she knew that the sign had pointed toward her house because that was where her greatest fear lived. Not a thing. Not a person. A feeling. The fear of being alone. I listened to her story, and I nodded, and I told her that she had probably been tired, that the sign had probably been loose on its pole, that the wind or a passing truck had turned it. She looked at me with eyes that were tired and sad and certain. She said, there was no wind. There were no trucks. And the sign did not turn toward my house because it was loose. It turned toward my house because it knew. It knows what you are afraid of. And at 3:33 in the morning, it shows you. I did not believe her. But I could not stop thinking about what she had said. I started watching the sign after that. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, just before the hour, and walk to my window. My house was on 2nd Street, 3 blocks from the intersection, and from my bedroom window I could just make out the shape of the sign against the streetlights. For the first week, nothing happened. The sign stood still, facing the same direction it always faced. I told myself that Carla was wrong, that the stories were just stories, that I could go back to sleeping through the night without this strange, nagging curiosity. Then, on the 8th night, I saw it move. It was 3:33 exactly. I know because I looked at my phone as the numbers changed. The sign turned. Not quickly, but smoothly, as if it were mounted on a bearing that had been freshly oiled. It rotated on its pole, the red octagon catching the orange light of the street lamp, and it stopped when it was pointing directly at my house. At me. I was standing at my window, 3 blocks away, and the sign was pointing at my window. I felt a cold spread through my chest, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I knew, without knowing how I knew, that the sign was pointing at the thing I feared most. The problem was, I did not know what that thing was. I had spent 40 years on the road, facing down storms and drunk drivers and breakdowns in the middle of nowhere. I did not think I was afraid of anything. But the sign disagreed. The next night, I drove to the intersection. I parked my car on the shoulder of Maple Street, 100 feet from the stop sign, and I waited. The clock on my dashboard ticked toward 3:33. I watched the sign. At exactly 3:33, it turned. This time, I was close enough to hear it. A low, grinding sound, like stone on stone, like teeth grinding in sleep. The sign rotated until it was pointing directly at my car. Directly at me. I sat there, frozen, and I felt the cold again, deeper this time. The sign was not just pointing at me. It was pointing through me, past me, towards something inside me that I had never wanted to look at. I started the engine and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I started researching the sign. I spent hours in the town library, scrolling through old newspapers on microfilm, reading police reports and accident records and letters to the editor. The sign had been installed in 1957, after a family of 4 was killed at the intersection when a drunk driver ran through the stop sign and hit their car head-on. The family's name was Ashworth. The father, mother, and 2 children died instantly. The drunk driver survived. He was sentenced to 10 years, served 4, and moved away. But before he left, he told a reporter that he had seen something at the intersection that night. He said he had been driving down Maple Street, and he had seen the stop sign, and he had tried to stop. But the sign had turned. It had turned to face him, and in its red octagon, he had seen his own face, old and dying and alone. He had closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was through the intersection, and the other car was crumpled against a tree. He did not remember hitting them. He only remembered the sign. After the accident, the town held a hearing about the intersection. Some people wanted to remove the stop sign altogether, to replace it with a traffic light or a roundabout or nothing at all. Others wanted to keep it, because they said the sign was not the problem. The problem was the land. The intersection had been built on the site of an old poorhouse, a place where the town had sent its unwanted, its insane, its dying. The poorhouse had burned down in 1923, killing 17 people who had been locked in their rooms for the night. Their bodies had never been positively identified. They had been buried in a mass grave somewhere near the intersection, and the town had paved over the grave and built the road and tried to forget. But the stop sign remembered. The stop sign had been planted in the ground above those forgotten bones, and every night at 3:33, it pointed toward the thing that scared you most, because the dead in the mass grave had died scared, and their fear had soaked into the soil like water. I did not know if I believed the story about the poorhouse. But I could not deny what I had seen with my own eyes. The sign moved. It turned. And it pointed at me. So I decided to go back one more time, to face it, to prove to myself that I was not afraid of anything. That was my mistake. That was the mistake that everyone makes. You cannot prove that you are not afraid by walking toward the thing that scares you. You can only prove that you are foolish. I drove to the intersection at 3:15 in the morning. The streets were empty, the houses dark, the streetlights humming their low electric hum. I parked my car in the same spot as before, on the shoulder of Maple Street, and I walked to the stop sign. I stood beneath it, looking up at its rusted face, its faded white border, its bolted connections to the pole. I reached up and touched the metal. It was cold, colder than the air around it, and it vibrated slightly, as if something inside it was humming. I looked at my phone. 3:31, 2 minutes. I waited. The wind picked up, blowing dead leaves across the pavement, rattling the branches of the trees that lined the street. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept my eyes on the sign. 3:32, 1 minute. The sign began to tremble. Not much, just a small vibration, like the first tremors of an earthquake. The metal groaned softly, and I stepped back. 3:33, the sign turned. I was standing directly in front of it, so when it turned away from me. It rotated on its pole until it was pointing down Maple Street, toward the old part of town, toward the cemetery and the abandoned church and the woods that bordered the county line. I stared at the sign, confused. It was not pointing at me. It was pointing past me, down the road, toward something I could not see. I turned and looked in the direction the sign was pointing. The street was empty. The streetlights cast their orange pools on the pavement, and nothing moved in the spaces between. I looked back at the sign. It had not moved again. It was still pointing down Maple Street, toward the dark. And then I understood. The sign was not pointing at me because I was not the thing I was most afraid of. The thing I was most afraid of was behind me. It was down that road, in the dark, waiting. I had spent 40 years on the road, facing storms and drunk drivers and breakdowns. I had told myself that I was not afraid of anything. But I was wrong. I was afraid of what was coming. Not death. Not pain. Not loneliness. The unknown. The thing I could not see, could not name, could not prepare for. And the sign was pointing at it, down Maple Street, where the road curved into the trees and disappeared. I got back in my car and drove home. I did not look at the sign again. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove slowly, carefully, and I parked in my driveway and went inside and locked the door. I sat in my living room with the lights on until dawn. And when the sun rose, I went to the window and looked down the street toward the intersection. The sign was facing the right way. It was just a stop sign, rusted and old, doing its job. But I knew that at 3:33 the next morning, it would turn again. And it would point at the same thing. The thing down Maple Street. The thing I could not see. I have not gone back to the intersection at night. I take a different route home from the grocery store. I avoid Maple Street after sunset. But the sign does not need me to be there. It turns whether I am watching or not. I know this because my neighbor Carla told me. She still drives past the intersection on her way home from the hospital, even though it terrifies her. She says she has to. She says the sign points at her house every night, at the same time, at the same thing. Her fear of being alone. And she says that one night, she is going to follow where it points. She is going to get out of her car at the intersection and walk in the direction the sign indicates, and she is going to find out what is waiting for her at the end of that road. I begged her not to. I told her that some things are not meant to be found. She just smiled, that tired, sad smile, and she said, "But I am already alone. What else is there to be afraid of?" She moved away last month. I do not know where she went. Her house is empty now, the curtains drawn, the mailbox overflowing. I knock on her door sometimes, just to see if she came back. No one answers. But I see her car sometimes, in the distance, on Maple Street, driving toward the intersection at 3:30 in the morning. I see her brake lights glow red as she stops at the sign. And then I see her headlights turn, following the direction the sign points, down the road toward the dark. I am an old man now. I do not have many years left. And I have started to think that maybe Carla was right. Maybe you have to follow. Maybe the sign is not a warning. Maybe it is an invitation. Maybe the thing you are most afraid of is the only thing that can set you free. I do not know. I only know that tonight, I am going to drive to the intersection. I am going to park my car on the shoulder of Maple Street, and I am going to walk to the stop sign. I am going to stand beneath it at 3:33 in the morning, and I am going to watch it turn. And when it points down the road, toward the thing I cannot see, I am going to follow. I am going to walk. I am going to find out what has been waiting for me all these years. If you ever find yourself at the intersection of Maple and 2nd, and if you look at your phone and see that it is 3:33 in the morning, do not stop. Do not look at the sign. Do not wonder what it is pointing at. Just drive. Drive through the intersection without stopping, even if it means running the stop sign. Because the sign is not there to control traffic. It is there to show you what you are afraid of. And once you see it, once you know what it is pointing at, you will never be able to look away. You will lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what is waiting for you down that dark road. And one night, you will get in your car, and you will drive to the intersection, and you will follow. Just like Carla. Just like me. Just like everyone who ever stood beneath that sign and asked themselves what they were really afraid of. The answer is not death. The answer is not pain. The answer is not loneliness. The answer is the thing you cannot name. The thing that has been there all along, hiding in the blind spot of your life, waiting for you to notice it. The stop sign knows. The stop sign has always known. And at 3:33 in the morning, it shows you. It points. And all you have to do is look.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.